Now let's begin to sculpt our character. So let's take the low res that we've got here. Let's move up to the next subdivision level, or if you don't have one yet, you can hit Shift D to create one. And then if you want to, you can continue to use grab, and we can start to add a little bit of shape and sort of block things out that way. So we can kind of pull out kind of some of the brow shape here, kind of start to pull out, where we want the mouth to be. Maybe the chin kind of comes down here. So, that's one way of doing things, just gradually building it up. And so, kind of figure out where we want the eyes to kind of sit, and we kind of push that back in. And that kind of gives us a good overall idea of where we've got things. We can go up to the next level. And as we start to get up into the higher levels, the grab tool begins to lose a little bit of the appeal, because as we start to come in here with higher and higher reses, we're going to start to affect smaller and smaller areas. So whereas at the lower levels we're moving the overall shape, here at the higher levels, and if we subdivide this again, at the higher levels we're just moving little parts of it. And so it's very easy for us to get dense and elements to our shape, or shapes that we don't really want, because we're affecting such a small area. So once we start getting into the higher subdivision levels, so right now we're at level 3, let's kind of subdivide this again. One thing I like to do is come up a few subdivision levels, so we'll sort of skip ahead a little bit, and let's turn off our wireframe, and then I'm going to start to just block things in. Now we can use the sculpt tool, or we can use the wax tool, and let's use sculpt for now. I'm going to get fairly low strength. I've still got mirroring on, and so now we can sort of come in, and I'm just clicking and dragging to create these overall shapes. We can hit Shift to go back over these and kind of smooth them back out. We can also come in and hit Control to kind of reverse the function of that. So if our default brush is pulling material out, by hitting Control, we're able to do the inverse of that. It's the same thing as hitting this little invert checkbox. And so we can kind of start to work out some larger overall shapes, smooth them back in a little bit, maybe pull out kind of the area of the nose, and you can see the kind of effect that you can get. Another tool that I like to use, as I said, is wax. And this will give us kind of more of a traditional type of a look as far as laying material on to our mesh here. And so I can come in and start to build out kind of cheekbones here, build out this sort of nose, and just sort of block things out. We want this mouth to come up and down, and we want him to have this nice little sort of grumpy frown here. We can sort of build in the chin here. Bring this down, and so at this stage I'm just blocking in these overall shapes. We want this to kind of continue down from the nose down and around, coming down from this cheekbone. We want it to extend down, and we can kind of smooth this back out. Again, we can sort of push material in, come back in, define the overall kind of brow shape. Now, the nice thing about working with multiple subdivision levels, at any time you can go back in. If you decide you need to change something, go back to a lower level maybe, reshape this a little bit, maybe move up a level, and start to kind of pull this detail out a bit. And all that detail that you've added up at higher levels is going to be retained. So you're not going to lose that information if you go down to the lower levels. So, you can come down here to the lower levels and shape things. And then if you go back up to the higher level, all that detail is still going to be there. Okay. Now, one thing that we don't have right now are sort of sharp lines. So one thing we can do is go to Sculpt, and we can use something called a stamp. Let's go all the way over here, and these are called vector displacement stamps, and they'll allow us to get different effects based on what the stamp is. So you can see as I click on the stamp, it's going to load up here in our Sculpt tool. I'm going to make sure that randomize is turned off. Let's check it up on the top. You can see This one allows us to get kind of a nice sharp line. Let's increase the strength of it. You can see that allows us to get a nice sharp line there. And so we can start to define things here by bringing this in and creating kind of a line here. So we want this to kind of come down, and then we want a kind of division here. The mouth, we want to have a nice division where that lip is, and so we can start to bring that down a little bit. And so we can use this stamp with our sculpt tool to just help us define things. We can also, using the control button, do the inverse, which will basically create a kind of a sharp edge. So if we wanted to create a sharp edge on the base of this lip, we could do that there. We could also come in here and kind of better define our eye socket, kind of figure out where that eye geometry is going to go in there. Something like that. We can also start to make kind of some overall wrinkles. So coming in here at the corner of the eye, coming in here along the side, and start to kind of work this up and over. You want to pay some attention down here at the bottom of the body. Kind of pull this in and just have a little fun with it, creating these sort of wrinkles coming down. Just for this grumpy guy. So, it also depends on your, if you're using a pen, your pen pressure, so you can create light wrinkles and then maybe some sharper wrinkles. So if I come in with a smaller brush, I can create these sharper wrinkles coming in here and kind of define this cheek flesh, or not the cheek, but under the mouth, kind of define that flesh a little bit more. And then we can go back, let's say, to our, let's go back to our wax and add a little bit more material up here on the nose. And I want this to flow a little bit more to the side here and come down along the base, or along the top rather, of the mouth. And let's kind of extend that up into the forehead a little bit more. We can start to make a little bit more of kind of a forehead look here with some of these wrinkles. Again, just kind of smoothing this back out. And then going back to our sculpt, can come in and create some of these smaller wrinkles coming across the nose area here. We can come in and create kind of an upper lip by kind of using control to define that a little bit more. Let's create kind of some flesh underneath where the eye will be. So kind of define that a little bit more. Now, I like to usually, wait to detail the eye too much until, we've got the actual eye geometry in there. Okay, but you can see you can start to get a lot of detail in here with the wrinkles. Let's come in along these little antennas here, these little details, and I'm just going to create some wrinkling along there. We'll end up posing these, so kind of drooping them over a little bit, pulling them down a bit. Coming around these, we probably want to have a little bit of detail coming around the base. Same thing around the arm, and you can see the arms are actually pretty squared off. And so in this process, one of the things that you might want to do is to kind of remove some of that. And we can do that by going down in the subdivision levels, and we can maybe just kind of smooth things out a little. You can also use grab if you want to come in and kind of maybe define the shoulder a bit more. Make sure that your symmetry is on if you want it to be on, because otherwise, if you forget, you'll have detail that you've added to one side and it won't be on the other side. So just keep that in mind. We can come in with wax, and I'll just kind of build out this shoulder a little bit more. So coming in here and kind of building that back up into the body so it's not, completely straight like that. And kind of come in and fill in these gaps here. Okay, and then, anywhere you've got a joint, you can come in and kind of add that flesh there. Same thing here, kind of under the arm, across the hand, adding a little bit of detail there. maybe along the fingers. So you can spend a lot of time just going through and adding detail to this. The main things we want to get are the facial features. Whatever facial features you want, these are the kind of the features that I'm creating here. Want some kind of overall wrinkling to this. We want to sharpen up kind of the bottom lip here. And then you can see here, see this sort of artifacting here? This is a good sign that you may need to increase your resolution because you're trying to sculpt at an angle to the flow of the polygons, and it's not really working because you're getting these facets. So in that case, you can go ahead, create a new subdivision level at the top. You can see how that faceting goes away, and now the detail that you add is really, really sharp. So that's one of those times where you sculpt until you start to get those artifacts, and then you can subdivide again and then go back in and sort of go over what you've done. One thing to do is at the corner of the mouth, let's use our wax and let's make sure to add a little pouch, sort of a little pouch of flesh right at the corner of the mouth. Okay, so something like that. And that really will set off the corner of that mouth, and you can come back in with your sculpt and your stamp, come back in and sort of emphasize that a little bit more. You can also use pinch to pull those lines together if you want to do that. And then also on the lip, come in and make a little bit of kind of a bumpiness coming out from the lip. And don't really try to blend it. Just come out from the center and pull out these kind of striations here out to that fine edge that you've created. And you may want to get kind of a smaller brush size, probably not that small. And come in and add a little bit of that lip detail. Okay, and you can see how the brow's kind of flat, so you can always go back in to a lower level, get a big brush size, and pull that detail out. So I'm just kind of pulling it out, pulling it forward a little bit. Just being pretty careful. I don't want to create any sort of overly bumpy surface. Okay, so you want to get it to a point where it's something like that. And again, it's only been, I think, 12 minutes here. And so that's not a lot of time to begin sculpting. You probably add a little bit more detail. You can come in also along the feet, start to add a little bit of detail in there. So, I would use grab to kind of shape those. Or maybe pull this out straight. And then go back in with probably wax and begin to add to that detail, to those feet. And it's pretty, you can get pretty rough here with the you don't have to make any sort of specific toes. Just come in and kind of add a little bit of detail there, kind of break it up. You can see where it's bent down, and so I would definitely want to come in and kind of pull that back up so it's nice and flat. All right, so just have a little fun with the detail. Don't hurry through it necessarily to get to the next lesson. Take your time and kind of get to that level. So you don't have anything along these with as far as kind of the high density or high frequency skin detail. We don't have any of that yet. But get to this point where you've got some of the large shapes and wrinkles built in. And then in the next lesson, we'll take a look at adding that high frequency detail. We'll add it in a very flexible way that lets us dial in the exact intensity that we want. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more sculpting on this, and we'll come in the next lesson and look at sculpt layers and stamps and stencils and adding some high frequency detail. So we'll do that next.